Let's continue then with our weaving of this tapestry that we are revealing, creating together even. Continue weaving together elements and themes and threads that we've touched on before, introducing other threads, making connections, moving back and forth over the same areas and bringing more out, strengthening connections, etc. And if we look particularly, following on from what we've been talking about, the connection between erotic soulmaking and then our relationship to Dharma and to notions of awakening, visions of awakening and what the path is, and included in that, we said, must be also then the relationship to the vision, the view of the world, which means the senses and sense experience, which also means Eros, included in that itself. What is the relationship with Eros itself, and that comes out of soul-making, if you like, that it is necessary for soul-making, but also that is furthered through soul-making, and as an element of that, the view and relationship with sexuality. So in kind of going over this again and bringing out certain elements and tying elements together, also want to a little bit look at some parallels or point out some parallels and connections with other traditions. In some cases, other Buddhist traditions, particularly the vajrayana traditions, Tantra, but also other Western traditions, etc. As a footnote to that point, actually, just to say, the insight meditation tradition, so I consider my sort of root tradition, if you like, is an evolving animal. It's an evolving tradition. It's actually relatively new. I mean, you could point to its birth in the 20th century, perhaps in Burma and Thailand. There's a case for that. But as a tradition, there's a case for saying it's relatively new, and there's definitely a case to be made for the fact that it's evolving. And looking back at that short period of the insight meditation tradition since its sort of emergence or inception, we can see very clearly, if you look at the Pali Canon text, for example, that the insight meditation tradition has thus far been quite selective about what it takes from the Theravadan tradition. It's probably more Catholic now in what it takes, more wide in what it takes than it was, let's say 30 years ago when I started. Was it 30? More than 30 years ago. So part of that selectivity has to do with cultural congruence and what Westerners feel comfortable with, or what Westerners can buy into, or what it was thought that Westerners can buy into in terms of beliefs and cosmologies. Part of it has to do that, and some people are very trenchant in their view that this needs to be upkept as a selection process, but not just in terms of cultural criteria, cultural congruence criteria, but also, for example, a teaching like the jhanas and samadhi is so central in the Pali Canon, so much so that the Pali Canon in the text, when they write it out, doesn't even bother to repeat when the Buddha mentions it again, just as in this sutta before, and just references you back rather than repeat it all again. And so you can see only quite recently is there a sort of emergence of interest in the insight meditation tradition in the practice of jhana, and recognizing that as really valid and valuable current of practice, stream thread of practice. Or how little emphasized, for example, the contemplation of death is, despite it being so central in the Satipatthana Sutta, which is regarded as the central text of the insight meditation tradition. So in a lot of ways, we could say a lot about this, but how, if you like, narrow is the selection of the insight meditation tradition from the broader Theravadan tradition of texts and practices and teachings. In addition to that, the insight meditation tradition was born, or came out of what had influenced, or the teachings received by the teachers in the insight meditation tradition, the initial teachers and then teachers since then. So it has mixed in with it a good dose of particularly Soto Zen, in the tradition of Shunryu Suzuki and others, and also, and this again you can trace it back to a certain time period, a sprinkling of Dzogchen, Tibetan tantric teachings, but there again it's very selective what is taken from the Dzogchen teachings or Mahamudra teachings, and they particularly only take usually what is taken is teachings about the nature of mind, and the way it seems they are congruent with teachings about resting in awareness and non-doing and so-called non-contrivance, etc., and the unfabricated nature of awareness and all this. So the teachings on the nature of mind form an element, a strand within tantric teachings in tantric Buddhism, and there are different levels of the teaching of nature of mind. So what you see when you really go into this is only is sort of tantric teachings a little bit taken out of context, for one thing, and also taken at different levels and brought in to mix with or find another language for certain insight meditation teachings. So this is just good to know in case you don't. Also, as a precursor to what I'm going to go into a little bit, and what we've already touched on in terms of corollaries and parallels with other traditions. But also come back to this point later on, that the insight meditation tradition is evolving. It always has been evolving, and I would say that's a good thing. So that was a little bit of a sort of preface. But let's start with a couple of lines from a tantric text, a Buddhist tantric text called the Dakini Vajrapanjara. Now, all these lovely Sanskrit tantric titles, because of the nature of the Sanskrit language, they can be translated in many ways. We could say, we could give a translation there: the dovecot of the diamond sky dancers, the dovecot of the diamond sky dancers, potentially, or the indestructible net of the Dakinis, or the diamond ceremony of the Dakinis. There's many possible translations. I think, though I'm not sure, that this tantric text, is a commentary on a basic tantra called the Hevajra Tantra, and I'm not sure about that. But it says, by passion, or through passion, by passion the world arises. Through the removal or the giving up of passion, the world, is destroyed. Through the removal or the giving up of passion, the world is destroyed. And then the second line says, by thorough knowledge, by thorough knowing, or by thorough gnosis, that word, gnosis again, that we used before, by thorough gnosis of the diamond passion, the mind becomes vajrasattva, a diamond being. By thorough knowing, gnosis of the diamond passion, the mind becomes vajrasattva, meaning a diamond being. Now, all these words that can be translated differently in the title, and even words like diamond passion and diamond being, these have in the Vajrayana teachings partly because of the Sanskrit language and partly because of the multi-dimensional nature of those teachings and multifaceted nature of the teachings, the very vocabulary itself has this polysemous nature, means multiple meanings, multiple levels of meaning. So what is a vajrasattva? What is a diamond being? What is this diamond passion? And as we saw, the titles can be translated in different ways, kind of like a jewel, like a diamond, reflecting different facets, different giving different faces of meaning, of hint, of inclination, of depth, of beauty. So just to say, vajrasattva is kind of like imaginal figures, which a vajrasattva is, so to speak, in our language, is an imaginal figure. It's an imaginal depth. It has an infinite depth of meaning as an imaginal figure, a diamond being, as does diamond passion, indeed. But vajrasattva is related. So one meaning of vajrasattva in the Japanese Shingon tradition is just as a tantric practitioner, someone who is moving on that path, opening that path of the empty-imaginal in our language. So tantric practitioner is what vajrasattva means. Vajrasattva is also the high bodhisattva, or the sort of Buddha, if you like, or an element of Samantabhadra, as a primordial cosmic Buddha that has to do with action, and not just meditation. And Vajrasattva is also connected with Sambhogakaya, which I think on the last retreat, the poetry of perception. So we can actually translate, in terms of systems, we can translate Sambhogakaya as the mundus imaginalis, the world, the realm of the imaginal. So there's a lot, and there's much more in that word vajrasattva. Is a tantric deity, really. But let's explore these couple of lines from the Dakini Vajra Panjara. And so the first one, by or through passion, raga, we touched on that word through in the first talk, I think, of this retreat. Through passion, the world arises. Through the removal or the giving up of passion, the world is destroyed. This, I hope you can, already I don't need to say this, but I'll say it anyway, I hope that it's clear that that is referring to exactly our understanding of dependent arising, dependent origination, through what we're calling clinging. By passion, let's say, by clinging, the world arises. Through clinging, in all its multiple richness and spectrum of depth of what clinging means. We've been through this before, I'm not going to repeat here. Through clinging, the world arises. The world of fabrication, the world of things, of self, other, objects, space, time, etc. No clinging, no arising of the world. Through the removal, giving up of passion, of clinging, when we learn through skillful, through the art of meditation on emptiness, etc., to attenuate the clinging in the moment, really drain it out, so to speak, of the plumbing system, the inflation system of dependent origination. Through attenuating avidya, through attenuating the push-pull with experience, through the removal, giving up of passion, of clinging, the world is destroyed, meaning the appearance of a world is destroyed, is not fabricated. Yeah? So that first sentence of the Dakini Vajra Pandra couplet there is really just reiterating, in a sort of very succinct way, the whole of the Buddha's teaching of dependent origination, emptiness of the world of perception, fabrication, dependent arising, dependent fading. And out of that, the understanding of the emptiness. The second sentence there, by thorough knowledge, by gnosis of the diamond passion, vajraraga prajnana, parijnana, in fact, vajraraga parijnana means, exactly that, through the thorough knowledge of the diamond passion, the mind becomes, vajrasattva becomes a diamond being. So, could this be referring to, or one way of reading it is exactly that through if we let go of clinging, but then knowing that everything is empty, and allowing in our language eros and that erotic connection, which we also know is empty because we know that everything is empty, and because eros stimulates soulmaking, which knows image as image, then what arises is this diamond being. Vajrasattva is a Buddha who arises with his or her mandala. So Buddhas in Tantric Buddhism and Bodhisattvas go with Buddha realms, Buddha fields. They go with worlds. They're not separate from the world. Their mandala, what is around them, which is their perception, the world that they perceive. So to become a Vajrasattva means to become a tantric practitioner, means to become a diamond being, an empty being who knows an empty world that is divine appearance, the mandala of the world of divine appearances. So that this second sentence there can be, yes, there's the first sentence reflects the dependent rising, dependent fading, which we know from my understanding of Theravada Buddhism, what the Buddha taught there, and Mahayana Buddhism, and in the second couplet, the vajrayana tantric understanding of a Buddha's tantric fabrication of a divine and empty world. Let's pull a few more pieces out of this. So I recall that quote from Jung in his autobiography. Eros is a cosmogonos, he said. A cosmogonos is a fancy Greek word for it, means a generator of cosmoses, that which inseminates, gives the seed for a cosmos. Eros is a cosmogonos, he said, he wrote. So in our language, we would better say that, we would say in the language that we're using with the definitions that we're using, desire is a cosmogonos. In other words, desire, whether it's craving or whether it's eros, clinging, desire is a cosmogonos because of this understanding of dependent origination. With the movement of clinging, in the whole breadth of what that means, desire, it will give rise, it will fabricate cosmoses, depending on different aspects of what's involved with that. Desire or clinging is cosmogonos. Craving, again, this is our language, when it's craving, there is one of the aspects of craving we delineated before and drew attention to. So craving is based on realism, on the assumption and the perception and the conceiving, even if it's unconscious, of the reality of the self at any level. So even a process view of the self, or a self as just vast, insubstantial awareness, it's still a realism there. There's still a level of self-view operating. So craving, in our language, in our delineation, the way we're using language, craving is based on a realism of self and of world and of object. So that when there is realism, what we get, what is generated in this cosmogonic process through desire, through clinging, when there's craving, when there's realism, we generate a real world, and all the kind of rigidity of that, all the contractedness of that, and all the kind of imprisonment that goes with realism and the perception and conception of realism, and thus all the dukkha, etc. So that's one of the essential ingredients of what delineates craving from eros in our language. When the kind of desire in the cosmogonic movement there is what we're calling eros, then what we get, as we've been outlining, is not the imprisonment of a realist sense of the world, of self, other world. We get rather a non-realist self, other world, and also eventually a sense of a divine and non-realist self, other world. This is the cosmos. And the cosmogonos there, when the eros is the cosmogonos and not the craving, then the cosmos that we get is a divine and non-realist self, other world. So that, going back to the Pali Canon and the Buddha delineating bhava tanha as what can be translated as craving for becoming or craving for being. That word bhava, I know some people try and make a distinction, but actually in Pali and Sanskrit can mean either becoming or being. There isn't really that distinction there. Being and becoming, and if you understand that time is empty, same, being, becoming. So bhava tanha can be, the Buddha delineated, can be rupa raga, meaning desire for the perception of form, or arupa raga, which, if you like, is a more subtle bhava tanha, more subtle craving for being or becoming in what's called the immaterial realms, or the experience of the formless jhanas. So this was a defilement in the Pali Canon, and if you like, there's a, as we said before, progressive sort of escaping from this, so that most human beings have desire for material forms and what the Buddha called the chords of sense pleasure and sense experience and all that. To have just a desire for the rupa jhanas, what the Buddha called fine material form, the realm, the level of fine material form, which if you know the jhanas, this really makes sense. The body is experienced as exactly that, much more refined form, energetic form, which we've drawn attention to with our talking about the energy body, etc. And so that's, if you like, an improvement, a move away from the gross entanglement of sense, pleasure, and materiality in what's called the material realm in the Pali Canon. But even an improvement over an attraction to the fine material realm of the first four jhanas is an attraction solely to the arupa jhanas, the formless jhanas, the immaterial realms. And then eventually even that, this is one of the last bastions of craving, of tanha, for what's called a non-returner in the Pali Canon, the third of the fourth levels of awakening. And with arahantship, or full awakening, even that craving for being, becoming, experience of the arupa jhanas, the formless or immaterial realms, even that is let go of. And there's this movement, as we said before, transcendent movement, gradual transcendent movement to the unfabricated, to that which is even beyond the formless realms in terms of its degree of unfabrication. So there's a sort of weaning off, that's a good way of putting it, a weaning off attachment to the being, attachment to being, let's say, in any sphere whatsoever. And so this right there is a shape given, an articulation given to what mentioned Robert Bellah called this movement of world rejection, that's characteristic of a lot of religions of a certain period, and it certainly was there before the Buddha. So if you like, he inherited that. It wasn't the only teaching that was around in his time, so he had his pick of what he could, just as in ancient Greece, there was a pick of kind of world-rejecting movements and religions and philosophies, and those that denied any kind of world rejection and were flatly material, etc. So the Buddha chose that, really, chose to incorporate that, to keep that, to sanction that in his initial presentation of the path there. And there's a movement through this progressive weaning, what's usually progressive, sometimes you read very sudden ending of that bhava tanha, craving for being or becoming, there's a progressive weaning to the ending of rebirth, to the ending of being and becoming once and for all in any world of form or formless. There's this transcendent thrust. But either with a kind of tantric formulation or conceptual framework, or in the kind of parallels that we're talking about in the language of Eros, Psyche, Logos, there are a lot of parallels between those two. I wouldn't make them equivalent, and I'm not interested in doing that for myself, but there are parallels there. Could we then talk about, having said all that, a non-realist becoming? A non-realist bhava, being or becoming, so that yes, the self is fabricated, and the world in a certain cosmopoesis, the imaginal self and the imaginal other, there is the becoming of that, there is the being of that, but it's a non-realist bhava. So, with the cosmopoesis there that goes with everything that we've been talking about, and it's part of the tantric mandala and the tantric view of divine appearances, etc. So that there's again a distinction between craving and eros, and there's a distinction between realist bhava tanha and what we might call non-realist bhava or becoming and world. So, as I said, this vajrasattva, this diamond being, is implied in that is this imaginal realm. He's a Buddha that's associated with the Sambhogakaya, with the imaginal world opening up, the seeing of all appearances as divine, and these tantric Buddhas, vajrayana Buddhas, and deities and bodhisattvas, they're not separate from the mandala they appear in. Yes, non-duality there, subject and object, and included in that, and absolutely as a premise, as I've mentioned before, of tantric practice, is that self, world, and other are thoroughly known as empty. So tantric practice should be take place or take its launch from that understanding, and be imbued all the time thoroughly with that understanding, the emptiness of self, the emptiness of the deity, and the emptiness of the perception of the world, of any world. And what does this mean, diamond passion? The word vajra, diamond, again, it has multiple levels of meaning and facets of meaning, but one of its implications is, like a diamond, it's supposedly indestructible. So indestructible passion. It also implies empty. So when you say something is vajra this or vajra that, it implies already that it's empty of inherent existence, and implies too a kind of holiness, a sacredness there. Indestructible passion, empty and holy, and, if you like, everlasting passion. What is that? To me, we could make a parallel there with what we're calling eros. And I've said many times now, can we notice in the imaginal practice, in the meditation, when there's eros around, and there always is eros to some degree with imaginal practice, even if it's very subtle, can you notice or begin to notice the sacred and divine nature of eros, meaning just the perception of sacredness and divinity, the aroma, the intimation, the feeling of sacredness and divinity, whatever that means, or however that is communicated in the imaginal terrain and in the practice, however it's communicated to you, however you pick up on that, whatever the expression or manifestation there of sacredness or divinity is. There's many, many ways that can be presented to us, that we can get a sense of that, and many, infinite, I would say, in fact. And sometimes it comes in a very clear way. It's actually personified, if you like, in the image itself. So maybe I'll share something. There's a sort of background to this image that I think I might have shared in a previous retreat. I actually can't remember, but so it belongs to a series of images, and so moving kind of slowly over a period when I was on retreat and practicing with them and sort of pacing myself with them, and they sort of evolved. One thing led to another, slowly over some days, weeks even, I can't remember. So one whole set of images, which I think I shared, but I could be not remembering correctly, involved a burnt man, a man who's horribly burnt and receives a healing bathing from a holy pool, from a kind of beautiful goddess, very pure, bathing in pure waters, and very loving, very healing. And he's horribly burnt and a sort of outcast because of that. And so he's so burnt that he's incapable of tending to himself and bathing himself. So she bathes him with this beautiful pure water, and there's a lot of grace there and mercy infusing her healing, infusing her being, a lot of tenderness, a lot of compassion, a lot of grace with that. So somehow at some point in this image, it's not just his face is kind of melted from the burns, but his arms are too, so that they're kind of melted into his sides, so that he can't even raise them, and they're always kind of pressed to his side. So his whole body is kind of fused, if you like, it's one large surface of burn-scarred flesh, and in this sort of, if you can imagine that, a body looking like that was kind of smoothed out, if you like, with this fusion of fused together with burned, scarred flesh. The whole body, his whole body, began to look to me at some point like a lingam, like a huge phallus, or those sort of divine phallus sculptures, etc., that you get in different cultures, or just like a huge phallus. And then after a few days, another image sort of linked itself to that image of the lingam that was kind of evolved from this image before, or kind of handed over to another image, if you like, almost. And here there was a goddess that was connected with that first goddess, let's say, that was bathing the burnt man, and this goddess now, is it the same? Is it different? Not sure. She was passionately making love with, kind of erotically embracing and being penetrated by this lingam. And so the lingam, if you remember, it's actually slightly bigger than a tall and wide human body. So again, it doesn't kind of make sense anatomically, biologically, etc. But it's an image, so we have room for that. And she's kind of rubbing her whole body ecstatically and passionately and lovingly against this lingam. And there's, it's very sexual, very erotic in that sense. And she gives herself. There's this kind of total opening and abandon. She gives herself and her whole body to it. And despite the seeming sort of physical impossibility because of its relative size, she's penetrated by the lingam everywhere, every possible entry point biologically, but even ones that don't make sense biologically, and this is more sort of intuitive sense in the image rather than the visual sense. So penetrated through her eyes. What does that mean? I don't know. It's a poetic sense, through her senses, through her whole body, everywhere at once. And she is on fire with desire, not literally fire, but her desire is wild, it's fluid, it's fiery, it's full, and it's full-bodied. It's also insatiable. There's something I recognize in the image as I'm working with it about her and about her desire. And there's this quality of insatiability to her eros. Or should I say, because it's not like it's not that she's unfulfilled or pained by the dukkha of desire, by this insatiability, but it's just that her eros is inexhaustible. And there's no problem with that inexhaustibility. It's part of the divinity. It's holy, and part of its holiness is its inexhaustibility. And she is devoted to this lingam. She's devoted also to the erotic meeting, to the surrender, to the passion, to the eros itself. And so in this image, in this imaginal practice, I sometimes feel as if, we've talked about this before, about how the kind of identification can be mobile in the imaginal practice. So at times I feel very vividly as if I am that lingam. Feel the goddess kind of rub herself against me, open to me, etc. At other times I become the goddess and feel it all as if from within her body. And at other times I seem to kind of feel both together. A lot of love here is a lot of love and beauty in the wild passion, and I too am sort of filled with some kind of sense of worshipping there. And worshipping this that I was witnessing and kind of participating in. And I'll say one more thing about the image, because I also felt, again, very strong, there's some kind of, something goes deep and firm in some kind of, I want to use the words nuptial commitment, like emerging through and in this particular erotic image that, I could have just regarded, this is really weird, this is really out there. But it's just, and partly why I'm sharing it, all these kind of images, I've said this before, it's worth saying again, is just because, for a lot of people hearing this, some people just say, well, that's just weird, I can't relate to that. But other people will be hearing, and I want to cast a different light on images that may arise for people that initially they're fearful of, or they think they're weird, or they think it's pathological or unhealthy or this or that, and actually say, maybe there's something holy here. If I can just let go of that stranglehold, contraction of my initial mind programming to regard it as abhorrent or too weird, or what will it mean about me, or I'll become kind of deranged or, uncontrollable, monster or something like that. I'm partly sharing that all this at the risk, of course, of people thinking I'm weird or whatever like that. I know that I'm not, because people talk to me as well and they share. And I just want to really open that up and kind of normalize something and open the range of what practice is, and prevent a kind of pain that happens when people just start fearing their own mind and the images that arise, and assuming something pathological just because of what the culture or certain subcultures, religious or secular, have indoctrinated them with. So there going back to the image, there is this deep strong feeling of something going deep in me, and very firm, like a kind of devotion, but a kind of commitment, a nuptial commitment, like I'm somehow through this particular image, I can't even say to what exactly, but I feel like I'm binding myself in like a wedding ceremony somehow. It involves me, I'm drawn into, and I somehow assent to some kind of commitment, and I'm not even sure exactly what. It's not that it could be anything, but and whatever it is something that I haven't been committed to fully before. So it's something new. In some ways, it seems in this image to be a commitment to the earth, to nature, and to protecting her. I think I shared this before. In fact, at some points in the image, it sort of goes off into other images, the imaginal figures that I've had from the past, from this wrathful deity nature, protector. I think I shared that one. But there's also a commitment here in this image to this goddess. I'm somehow committed to this goddess. And also in that, or with that, I'm committed to this erotic embrace and this penetration, that lovemaking, whatever that means, or all the levels of that. And then later, this is quite relatively early in this sort of practice for me, I have the intuitive sense that the very meaning of this image and of the commitment, it can grow, and it will indeed keep growing and expanding because of Eros's tendency to extension and expansion. And again, and just to mention, at times the whole that whole image has started to include the imaginal perception of the world and the bird song as sacred text, and other kind of cosmopoesis, particular kind of cosmopoesis spilled out of that. But there was an example of there's a lot in there I shared for different reasons, but two main ones. There was the clear sense, personified in the very image, of the inexhaustibility of Eros, and that inexhaustibility being one of the aspects of the holiness of Eros. So there's a sense of the holiness and the devotion and all that, unlike of the Eros, and then a particular dimension, if you like, or aspect of that holiness was the very inexhaustibility, this infinitude that we've been referring to, that has to do with divinity. Divinity and infinitude go together in all kinds of ways, perhaps in infinite ways. Very different from what the Buddha called or this word tanha actually means thirst, and it has the implication of an unquenchable thirst. So this is this inexhaustibility of Eros has a holiness to it, unlike the unquenchable thirst of tanha. Can they be mistaken for each other? Do they somehow overlap? Can one transform into another? Yes, we've been through all this before. So that's one element of why I shared that image. And also, again, this sense that there's devotion, divinity, and duty within an erotic image. And this is, again, maybe that's an element pregnant within the meaning of diamond passion, to go back to that tantric word, the vajrayana, diamond passion, and the duty and the divinity that come out of that. Knowing, by the thorough knowing of the diamond passion, one becomes a diamond being, a vajrasattva, empty, divine, and with this purpose of the bodhisattva there. So as I said, a Buddha in Vajrayana and Mahayana teachings always comes with his Buddha field, his Buddha realm, his Buddha or Bodhisattva comes with that, comes with the mandala, with the world of divine appearances, with the divine world. And we can see, tying that into what we've been saying about Eros and soulmaking and cosmopoesis, that that's exactly what we expect. When there's the diamond passion, when there's the Eros, and we thoroughly know that, and know the image as image, self and world are divinized in our perception. So, as we've been saying, Eros starts to involve, it implicates all the other elements and facets of our experience, of our world, of ourself, other world, etc., and draws that in. So, through the diamond passion, one becomes a diamond being in a world of divine appearances, and in what we've been saying so far is Eros will bring, when it is unfettered, so to speak, when it's not blocked, when Eros, Psyche, Logos are not blocked, when it is allowed to expand, fertilize, etc., when they are allowed to expand, fertilize each other, Eros, Psyche, Logos, there will be, Eros will give rise to, will stimulate a widening, deepening, multiplying, a manifold sense of divinity. The senses of divinity will widen, our sense of divinity will widen, deepen, and grow more manifold. Yes? So we could start with any erotic object, or eventually any object can become erotic for us. So we may start with a human other, we may start with a purely imaginal being, that's the beloved other, the erotic object. We may start with Eros towards the transcendent, unfabricated, the deathless nirvana, the ayin of the Kabbalah, the nothing, the transcendent nothingness of the Godhead. We may start with the world, either the world of conceived as matter. Matter is what we love. Matter is what we feel this erotic connection with, or the world conceived of as appearances, or just one thing, this tree, that forest, whatever it is. And also the erotic objects can be mixtures of all these. And in fact, so again, there's this manifold possibility of where Eros can go, and therefore, and then what it can make divine, and even in mixtures, you will get. So the erotic object can be a mixture of these kind of elements, and it will, in fact, because of the Eros Psyche Logos dynamic and because of cosmopoiesis, there will be, I would say, a natural tendency, a natural movement to the mixing of these facets, so that each object becomes multifaceted, and its very divinity is multifaceted. So the soul-making dynamic, the Eros Psyche Logos, expansion, insemination, movement, widening, deepening, in relation to a human other, for instance, we begin to perceive them, sense the divinity of them, in them, through them, etc., in their humanity. And then that spills over into cosmopoiesis, to the world. We've been through this. Or we start with a desire, the Eros, for the transcendent God, for the unfabricated, the hidden God, the apophatic movement. And at some point, perhaps after the realization of the unfabricated, experiences of cessation and that sort of thing, but perhaps before, there's a sense of that divinity, the sense of divinity widens, it deepens, and it particularizes. So it's not just in this oneness that pervades in different ways. We can know, and we move towards knowing and wanting to know the divinity, or God, if you're okay with that language, or the ultimate, as transcendent and immanent, as universal and as personal, as circumscribed in itself, so to speak, separate, if you like, from creation, and without any circumscribing, without limit, without borders, infinite and in everything, or everything in the divine or God or whatever, in everything in the same way, and in each thing in a way unique and particular to that thing. So all these directions and all these mixings and multifacetedness and multidimensionality of the sense of divinity. But Eros will naturally tend to widen, deepen, multiply the senses that we have of divinity, that we can feel, perceive, know, etc., making manifold, more manifold, ever more manifold of our senses of divinity. And how to navigate all this? If that sounds all... But I just call on what we actually already touched on. So again, just weaving things together here, going over what we've already gone with, new stitching, perhaps new colours, etc., making new connections. there can be eros towards the unfabricated, eros that longs for the transcendent other, eros that longs towards different levels of oneness that perhaps we don't know yet, etc., or we're only getting to know. And that eros needs a skillful development of the art and an understanding of working with clinging, letting go of clinging, as we've talked about, what we're calling clinging, that whole spectrum, and learning to move or to be moved along down on the spectrum of decreasing fabrication. And that's a skill and an art that we can develop, an absolutely beautiful and precious thing that is to develop all that range. So there's that kind of eros towards the unfabricated, to different kinds of oneness, etc. And then there's eros to, if you like, directed towards the world, towards the senses, towards selves and others, and the world of sense experience and things. And this kind of eros for the particulars and the not wanting to transcend, this will, in just saying what we've already said in other language, it will re-enchant the world and the senses, self and other, and the cosmopoesis and all that. There is a divinization, if that's the right word of the world and of the senses. So a while ago, one of the talks said we can reconfigure some of the original teachings, can add a whole other level here that might kind of echo, if you like, or sound almost like tantric language. But now we can say something like what I said before, knowing the emptiness and eternality of the imaginal, or knowing the emptiness and the timelessness of the imaginal, the world is re-enchanted. With the world re-enchanted, or in a world re-enchanted and empty, one is free to become impassioned. Eros is free to flow, to ignite. Impassioned, infinite things open infinitely. So knowing the emptiness and eternality of the imaginal, the world is re-enchanted. In a world re-enchanted and empty, one is free to become impassioned. Impassioned, infinite things open infinitely. So it's really saying something about how Eros is woven into the imaginal and soul-making, how that re-enchants and divinizes the world, knowing, seeing, sensing the emptiness and the eternality that allows more Eros and everything, infinite things, even more things than we even realized were there. More aspects are revealed to us, and they open infinitely, they gain dimensions and dimensionality. And as we said before, that sort of quasi-tantric aphorism, or if you like, you can turn it around, because there's always going to be mutual dependent arising between such elements. So the Eros is what re-enchants and what reveals to us the timeless level of the imaginal, that sense of the timelessness. But in fact, they're all mutually dependent. So Eros re-enchants, the opening up of things gives rise to Eros, to more Eros, because there's more that's attractive there. There's that beyond, sense of the beyond, and that stimulates more re-enchantment, etc. Yeah, so all those elements mutually dependently arising. And in terms of navigation, what's this asking for? It's just asking, I'm just drawing out one element of our conceptual framework again, as it's so worth getting clear about it. It's asking for us to understand this whole idea of, if you like, the choices we have in regard to fabrication and degrees of fabrication. To understand that and to make choices about navigating and to develop the arts of unfabricating, if you like, to different degrees, and expand our range with that and develop our capability with that. through the understanding of dependent origination, the skill and practice, and the art of practice there with emptiness, etc. As one direction. Another direction, you could say, is actually what we might call skillful or tantric fabrication or soul-making fabrication. And actually recognize this is fabrication, of course it is, but it's serving the purpose of soul-making, and it's non-realist. So there's those two, the sort of decrease of the fabrication, the attenuating of the fabrication, and the deliberate fabrication for the purpose of soul-making. And then kind of at one point of that spectrum, if you like, is what we might call, what most people would call mindfulness, or maybe even bare attention, where there's a sort of very slightly reduced level of fabrication compared to, say, a normal consciousness. Reduced from, say, more papancha, but a little bit less than normal consciousness. Well, depending on the intensity of the mindfulness, all kinds of things. But and what else is included with the mindfulness? But that, if we just delineate it as a sort of, it's just a point on that spectrum of fabrication, and its and how we're going to orient to that in practice. And it's very useful at times. You go into a mode of bare attention, go into a mode of simple mindfulness. It has its place for certain things, for certain disentanglements, etc. But the whole path, as we're trying to present it, encompasses much more, and really that's just a incredibly small sliver that has a certain limited usage and a certain limited possibility for soul making, a certain limited possibility for deepening insight, etc. But it's there and it's useful. To shrink the path to that, in my mind, would be an enormous shame, because you would be cutting off so much possibility. Okay, so this is important, that understanding and the just sort of developing one's arts of movement in those different directions, those different sort of places on the spectrum of fabrication, is important for our navigation in the wider sense, in the wider picture of what practice is. So, as we said before, and as you can already hear from this, is that all this implicates and involves the senses and sense experience and sense pleasure and our relationship to all that. So let me read you something from Nietzsche again, just a little passage. And he writes, "In the main, I agree more with the artists than with any philosopher hitherto. They, the artists, have not lost the scent of life. They have loved the things of this world. They have loved their senses. To strive for, quote, desensualization, that seems to me a misunderstanding or an illness. I desire for myself and for all who may live, without being tormented by a puritanical conscience, an ever greater spiritualization and multiplication of the senses. Without being tormented by puritanical consciousness, an ever greater spiritualization and multiplication of the senses. Indeed," he continues, "we should be grateful to the senses for their subtlety, plenitude, and power, and offer them in return the best we have in the way of spirit." We translate this into what we've been talking about. What are priestly and metaphysical calumnies against the senses to us? We no longer need these calumnies, these threats and teachings. It is a sign that one has turned out well when one clings with ever greater pleasure and warmth to the, quote, things of this world. For in this way one holds firmly to the great conception of man, let's say human beings, that a human being becomes the transfigurer of existence when she learns to transfigure herself. The great conception of the human being, that human being becomes the transfigurer of existence when she learns to transfigure herself. So can you hear in what he's saying what could be very much construed as exactly what we've been talking about? And if we substitute for the word transfigurer of existence, transubstantiation, alchemy, things we've talked about in the last retreat, through relating through an erotic connection with the senses and letting that eros-psyche-logos dynamic do its natural thing that it wants to do, there's a transfiguration of existence. In Nietzsche's terms, there's a transubstantiation of self, other, world. There's an alchemy that happens in the perception. Yeah? So again, there's a comparison again between tantric practice and emptiness practice. That the tantric practice of seeing appearances as divine, means sense experiences as divine. What reaches us, what we perceive, what we open to, what we fabricate through the senses, in the senses, to see that as divine and empty. So when there is a fading through insight, just for instance, really getting into the practice of regarding things as not self or things as empty, there's there's an attenuation of avidya at that point. So ignorance, avidya, usually regards things as self and usually regards things as having inherent existence. And when I engage a way of looking that regards things, for instance, as not self and as empty, the world of appearance, the things, self, others, and the whole world of appearance will fade to some extent. But I can, for instance, one can in practice, with the development of practice, learn to sort of engage that, incorporate that knowing of emptiness, so that things fade a little bit, but they're kind of loosened up and they lose some of their substantiality, typically. But you're not leaning all the way on that insight into emptiness. So you're kind of modulating it like the gas and the clutch pedal on a car. You're just modulating, so you're retaining perception and imaginal perception of divine appearances. And you can, either they naturally appear as divine, or you can just choose to perceive them in different ways as divine. You're lightly knowing the emptiness. You're keeping that there in the perceptions. There's a degree of unfabricating, but you're not letting them fade completely. You're not saying that fading is the better thing. You're not turning away, if you like, from the senses or denigrating the world of form, of perception, of experience. You're playing at that midpoint, mimicking the Buddha's perception, a Buddha's perception who is able to know emptiness completely and still perceive a world of appearances, of divine appearances. Transubstantiating the world of transubstantiating the world, transubstantiating the self, and the and the sense experience. Yeah, and there's that's captured in vajrayana iconography in the yabgyum, the erotic coupling or union of the Buddha and his consort, Buddhas and their consorts. We talked about this before. I think it's so beautiful and so profound. I'm going to actually repeat it now. The prajna being the female, usually characterized by the female, and the upaya. Prajna means wisdom, and upaya, the skillful means. So at one level, the compassion, at another level of meaning, the mandala of appearances, of divine appearances. So the wisdom, knowing aspect, the wisdom that knows emptiness, and the awareness that perceives, and the mandala of divine appearances are represented as in erotic sexual union, penetrating the mingling, if you like, of the two, represented iconographically with the sexual union there. In other words, the wisdom consciousness, if you like, the prajna, is the wisdom knowing. And remember, let's keep that knowing plural. Remember, if I really have wisdom, what I have is multiple ways of looking, and infinitely expandable ways of looking. That's what I end up with if I really understand emptiness, if my prajna is really developed. That there is not, therefore, the epistemicide, the shrinking down. So mindfulness reveals things as the way they are, or classical Newtonian science reveals things as the way they are, or whatever it is. There is not that epistemicide, what we're calling epistemic cleansing, these kind of words. There is this opening, because incorporated within that wisdom knowing is a whole range of ways of knowing. Yes? I heard also the fabulous phrase epistemic disobedience. Just refusing to go along with this cultural indoctrination in the West of what qualifies as a way of knowing reality. This is knowledge, that's reality, there's only one way of getting there, or if it's a Dharma shrinking of that into mindfulness or whatever. There's someone say, do you want your reality with or without additives? And the teaching there is supposedly that if you want the pure, real reality, with quote, without additives, that's what is given to you by mindfulness. And apparently metta as well. Is that really a full enough, deep enough, radical understanding? Is there not a misunderstanding wrapped up in that? But anyway, back to this tantric iconography. There's an erotic sexual union, interpenetration between the wisdom knowings, put it that way, the knowings that are that know emptiness and thus have a range of ways of knowing. Know that there's nothing but that, really. And even they are not real. The wisdom, the erotic union between the wisdom knowing and the world, a form of matter, of senses, which is recognized to be empty and divine. And as I said before, in the Buddhist iconography, this Buddha and his consort, Bodhisattva and their consort, are not actually separate. They together make the Buddha. They make the Buddha, male, female, neither, both, whatever. Not separate there. There's not the separation of the wisdom consciousness, the wisdom knowing, and the world, the senses, the world of form, of matter, of the senses. All of it empty, all of it divine. And within that, actually, there is, and if you know the teachings a little bit, there's room for the transcendent aspect of the gnosis, the transcendent aspect of the Buddha's mind, beyond appearance, beyond any form, beyond anything that can be said of it or predicated or attributed to it, the unfabricated. And at the same time, there's room for the immanence and the revelation, the discovery of the divine in and through, in different ways, the world of forms and experience. And you see this also again, Mira just making parallels here in Kabbalistic teaching and the Jewish mystical teachings. There's the eros between aspects or faces of the divine, aspects or faces of the Godhead. They're called sephirot. So, for example, some of you may know some of these teachings, but for example, between the sephirot of Tiferet and Malchut, which is also the Shekhinah that you've maybe heard of. In other words, between the divine transcendence there and the divine presence in the world, the immanence, the Shekhinah, there is an erotic connection, there is an erotic love, an erotic union. Yes, so right there, spelled out in all these mystical teachings, in very erotic language and depictions, is saying between the transcendent and the immanent, there is Eros. Between the wisdom knowing and the world of form, matter, senses, there is, sexual union. There is this erotic connection. Or to take another teaching from the Kabbalistic tradition, again from the Sefirot, the two Sefirot, Chochmah, which translates as wisdom or something like that, and is associated with a kind of level or dimension of being or a world of pure conception. And if we go back to the teachings about dependent origination and fabrication, if you like, the simplest conception is just any kind of self, any kind of knower, and any kind of known, which a knower always needs a known, and any kind of time, like just the present moment, just knowing, a known, and time, as the barest pure conception. You could say that's the seed in Chochmah. And that seed fertilizes Bina, another sphere, the third sphere called Mother, the celestial Mother. And that sphere has a kind of parallel, or is associated with a dimension of being, a level, a world of what's called knowing. It's the don't take this temporally, but it's the initial, the first forming, if you like, of objects, of perception or beings, the first appearance of distinct finite creatures, the realm of angelic or quote spiritual beings, the mundus imaginalis. Maybe there are parallels there, but again there's this erotic union depicted between the transcendent pure conception, if you like, and the world of appearances, the mundus imaginalis, the world of forms, etc. Again, Eros and the imaginal wrapped up together there, and you can also see some parallels here with teachings about dependent origination. Any fabrication needing, as I said before, some elemental, incredibly subtle conception there, the pure conception, perhaps of Chochmah, and how that gives rise then to the world, not necessarily in a temporally discrete progression there. What's interesting in the Kabbalah about this last erotic union is that human practice is necessary to restore these two Sefirot, Chochmah and Bina, the wisdom and the mother of the world, if you like, these two, Chochmah and Bina, to restore them, to restore their erotic union, to restore their lovemaking, to turn them back face to face after a mythic rupture within the divine itself. What's necessary is human practice for what's called the tikkun olam, the restoration, the healing of the world, is also the healing of the divine. So through human practice, these two, if you like, faces of the divine come back into the erotic embrace of lovemaking, of sexual union, for which they were originally intended. The wisdom and the wisdom that, if you like, the father that's pure conceptuality that generates fabrication, and the world that is fabricated there, the world of forms. And so you get in this teaching, the teaching that human practice is necessary somehow to divine and cosmic healing and completion. Human practice is necessary. And then wrapped up in this teaching as well is also the fact that this breaking of the vessels is part of this whole kind of, if you call it mythology, a psychology, a metaphysic, a multi-leveled, multifaceted teaching. This breaking of the vessels that I've referred to repeatedly, shavirat hakelim, if that happens repeatedly on different levels of being and in our own psyche and souls and all, if that happens repeatedly, every time that happens, the Chokhmah and the Bina, the celestial father, if you like, the celestial mother, the wisdom and the appearance of forms, if you like, are turned out, turn their faces from each other, looking in opposite directions, away from their erotic union. And so every time that happens, because it happens repeatedly, this breaking of the vessels, that rupture in the erotic union happens, and it's up to us, it's up to the human being to restore that that love-making between these aspects, directions, faces of God, faces of our being. Interesting to me, interesting. I don't know if you can hear the poetry in here and hear how many resonances there are in terms of ideas that can fertilize soul-making further. In tantric practice, as I mentioned before, there's a kind of what I can only really view as a mimicking of a Buddha's gnosis that can see emptiness and has some aspect that's completely transcendent and transcendent at the same time as immanent and appearance, as go slower. Sorry, mimicking a Buddha who is a Buddha is the only kind of being that can know fully the emptiness with the wisdom there, and perceive appearances and forms, etc. And so tantric practice is a kind of skillful, artful mimicking of that Buddha gnosis. And within that there's this understanding that it's referring to, the Buddha gnosis is referring to something, a cosmic dimension, this jnana, this gnosis, is something cosmic and divine. And at the same time, it's not other than our very minds. Our very minds, at one level, are the Buddha nature, are the Buddha mind, are the Buddha gnosis already. And it's not separate from, not other than our minds and this world. That mandala, the divine appearances, is this world, perceived differently, perceived through the lenses of gnosis, perceived through the lenses of imaginal perception when the eros is allowed to fertilize it, perceived through, if you like, deity practice in Tantra tradition. So, because it's not other than our minds, and because it's this world that is being created and discovered as divine and revealed that way, there is this aspect to all these teachings of participation. And so in the Kabbalah, the human practice is necessary for this healing of the divine and restoration of the erotic union between the face of the divine, and that's part of the healing of the cosmos as well. There's participation is woven in to these teachings. That idea of participation that I've touched on before and drawn attention to is woven into these kind of teachings. Some years ago, I'm sure I would have heard all this, and these kinds of things, it just sounds like completely abstract metaphysics or some ridiculous kind of mythology. Now it seems it's so resonant, so alive and multifaceted, these kinds of ideas. Anything but abstract, anything but kind of abstruse or kind of slightly strange, disembodied metaphysics from another era. What is it, as I hope I've said before in this retreat, to take ideas and let them be seminal, let them be seeds in the psyche, but through entertaining them, can we translate them into ways of looking and into imaginal perception. So an idea actually seeds the imaginal and fertilizes the eros, and the idea and the image start mixing and giving birth to other images or other dimensions of image. So not abstract metaphysics, all this vajrayana stuff and the kabbalah stuff and whatever, and Neoplatonic stuff, to be practiced. They refer to practices, to things and experiences that we can actually open to in practice, in our lives, and refer to ways of living and ways of seeing, ways of looking, viewing. Yes? In another strand or related strand of Jewish mysticism that sort of emerged in actually in Eastern Europe in the 18th century, really, talked about a double movement, and so there's the movement to what they called nullify the self and nullify matter and form in favor of the Godhead. In other words, to realize the emptiness of self, the emptiness of matter and form, and to become, if you like, nothing, and to dissolve into the unfabricated, we could say in our language, into the ayin in the Hebrew, in the Kabbalistic tradition, the nothing of God, the pregnant nothing of God, the infinite nothing of God. So there's one movement is the nullification of self and matter form in favor, and matter or form in favor of the Godhead. And the second movement of the double movement is to bring about an infusion of the divine, of the divinity, into the material world through religious worship and ritual and ethical action, what's called the mitzvot in the tradition. So there's a double movement there, what's called the upper unification, this annihilation in their language of the self and of the world, this emptying, if you like, dissolving into the transcendent, infinite, unfabricated God. And paradoxically, that upper unification, the ability to do that, enables a drawing down, or I would like to say, to the degree that we're able to do that, we are more able to draw down, in their language, the divine essence into the vessels of the finite world. And this drawing down, an ability to draw down, is called the lower unification. And that kind of teaching is wrapped up with in all kinds of language that, for a lot of us now, it will be really quite loaded and charged, and sometimes, for some people, scary, and etc. And there's also elements of that language that I would like to really not actually incorporate, just because it makes either too much of a duality or this or that. So, for example, they talk about leaving the bodily sheath and divine will and divine commandments, etc. So just leaving aside all that kind of language and taking something central from that because of its parallels to what we're talking about. So you can see there, for instance, the parallel, or that you can see that double movement in the in what we're describing as tantric practice. So that typical tantric practice with a yidam, with a tantric deity, there's first the dissolution into emptiness, the knowing of emptiness, and then the emergence from the emptiness and the imagining, if you like, of the deity, and even the becoming of the deity. And then at the end, dissolving it all back into emptiness. Thoroughly, so there's the drawing down, or even becoming a vessel of the divine, in this drawing down of the divine essence, but that's enabled and shot through with the knowing of emptiness. Yes, enabled by or shot through by the knowing of the emptiness and the fading of things. Is also parallel with imaginal practice, just as we've been talking about, working with an imaginal figure, working with a daemon, if you like, and feeling a sense of the duty to that, and the way that the sense of the divinity and the dimensionality of divinity of that figure, of that daemon, of that imaginal figure, and then the sense of duty. Can you see that too? I know it's image is image, it's empty, and that kind of enables me to listen, let's say, feel, sense this sense of divinity and duty. It's all wrapped up together. And then the question is, how does that duty embody? Is it just in a sort of inner devotedness, or is it somehow spilling over into the world? Careful of this literalization, concretization, but you can see the parallels there. And in alchemy, I can't remember if I've used this phrase before on another retreat, but there's an alchemical phrase sort of summing up of the goal of alchemy as the spiritualization of matter and the materialization of spirit. The spiritualization of matter and the materialization of spirit. And so again, you can see here echoes of these different streams of tradition kind of reflecting each other. Different traditions and the way they express things kind of paralleling or mirroring each other, or kind of groping towards the same thing. Spiritualization of matter, this nullification of self and matter, recognizing it as empty and as divine that way, and then the materialization of spirit, meaning that something like the drawing down of this divine essence into the vessels of the finite world, the divine influx. Yeah. And in that, actually in both the Kabbalistic Jewish mysticals teachings and in the Tantric teachings, in the Vajrayana teachings, there's a kind of double perspective, if you like, going on. It's made very clear in the Kabbalistic teachings. And this double perspective, it's almost like holding two perspectives, so not just a double movement, but a double perspective held as well. And this double perspective, to me, ensures a thorough non-dualism of the teachings. So even sometimes we're used to Advaita teachings of non-duality, etc. And unwittingly, they can actually create another kind of duality in teaching that there's nothing to do, there's nowhere to get, meditation's pointless, etc. You don't need to do anything. They kind of don't say much about ethics and all that. And there's a kind of almost like denigrating of effort, of striving, and that kind of movement there, and avoidance, or rather missing of the divinity and the particularity, etc. we've touched on. But with this double perspective, to me there's a more thorough non-duality. So one of the perspectives is already recognize that everything, all, is already divine. It's already all one. It's already all perfect. The essence of everything is divine. And the illusion of separate things that are not divine or separated from the divine is exactly that. It's an illusion. Because essentially all is one and already divine. One is one perspective. And the kind of the complementary perspective that we express, or better, we create and we manifest the divine. That we are therefore necessary to the divine. And this implies to me a whole other level of participation, that we are participating in the divine. We create, we manifest the divine. We are necessary to the divine. But holding those two perspectives, all already perfect, there's nothing to do. Any illusion of separate, non-divine things doesn't recognize the essence, the shared essence, the oneness of an already perfect divinity, that everything is already just divine. And at the same time, the complementary perspective that no, we need to create, manifest the divine, and we are necessary to the life of the divinity, if you like, to the soul and the soul-making of the divine. But both the tantric kind of framework and the Kabbalistic framework and these kind of teachings, they're related to practice. They absolutely imply and demand practice. They're not, as I said, abstract metaphysical teachings. They have nothing to do with our life. So I want to continue. Let's stop here for now. I want to continue then talking a bit more about historical processes with different traditions, but also how that has affected sexuality in particular, and maybe some other elements. So, but